Okay, let's begin chapter 9. This one's all about equipment, keeping safe facilities, and management of pests and critters that could get into your establishment. So what are the requirements that the health department is going to be looking for whenever they come and actually evaluate your facility? They're looking for surfaces that are easily cleaned. So walls would have to be non-porous. Ceiling tiles would typically have to be sealed in Harris County, which basically means that the kind of the foam material that they're made out of can't flake off. I have seen health inspectors allow a vendor to actually paint over it, and they would consider that sealed. Um, there can't be any holes in your walls or your flooring or your ceiling. Everything has to be regularly maintained, so meaning that it's clean and in good repair. In the picture here, you see them actually mopping underneath equipment. Almost all equipment in a kitchen is either going to be on legs or it's going to be on wheels. And the purpose of that is so that you can actually clean under it, and you can keep everything as sanitary as possible. Generally, they're looking for the smoothest materials. Those are going to be the easiest to clean. If you think about, commercial places that you've been in before, typically they're not, heavily textured walls or anything like that. You want to be able to sanitize them easily. So NSF stands for the American National Standards Institute. And these are standards that are created by this institute of, basically it's a list of requirements that says that the equipment has to be easy to clean, it has to be durable, it has to be resistant to damage, and then they will put their seal on products. So you will often see this little circle with the NSF inside of it on plastic goods around the kitchen. You'll see it on certain tools. Basically, they've put their check mark on it, saying that this is an acceptable commercial tool that meets their criteria. So once your equipment has been installed at your place, you should already get a maintenance contract. So somebody that is going to be there for you to call upon whenever something breaks or your refrigeration goes off temperature. You need to be able to call somebody out quickly. Generally, you get a little bit of a warranty whenever you purchase something, but in the event that you get it secondhand or something like that, you would want to make sure that you have a repair person or a maintenance person on site or someone that you can call out whenever you need, especially for refrigeration and ice machines. Those are typically the problem children of your any restaurant. So make sure that whoever you hire is qualified to do it. A lot of brands will certify for their brand, or they'll train them for certain brands, meaning that technicians are very familiar with the workings of that equipment. You should have a maintenance schedule for certain items, so such as hood cleaning and things like that. Also pest control. You would want to make sure that you have an established schedule so that it's not something that gets overlooked. Check your equipment regularly to make sure it's working correctly. So even if people are using it every day, it's good to have a manager do just sort of a safety check, go through and make sure that everything is in working order, no buttons are missing, the cables are not exposed, nothing's rusted out or anything like that. You want to make sure that, a lot of times people that work with it every day, they'll just continue to work with it and they won't report it. So it's good to have someone who's actually looking for, any violations. So dish machines have their own set of code requirements. They should be easily reachable. They should be conveniently located. It should be, nearby the facilities that, wherever the dishes are going to be produced, you should, have a dish machine very close nearby there. If someone has to walk very far, that can be a hindrance to the operation. Um, there should be a way to keep utensils, equipment, and other food contact services from being contaminated. And then you need to follow your manufacturer's instructions. Make sure that you actually installed it correctly, that you're using the correct chemicals, that it's vented correctly, that if it needs a extra hot water booster, it has that. Everything that you need to make sure that it's going to pass. Um, So there's two different types of dishwashers. Typically, there's either they have a chemical rinse where it has a sanitizer that will be sprayed on, similar to how the 3-compartment sink works, or it will have a hot water sanitizing. So in the event that it's hot water sanitizing, then it needs to come up to a temperature of 180 degrees. Your dishwasher should have a digital readout of the temperatures. If you come to campus next semester, or you come and look at the dish machine, you'll notice that as it runs, you'll get temperature readouts, and you'll see exactly what that last temperature was whenever it was on the rinse, and that's how we know that it's code compliant. Health inspectors sometimes also have a little temperature strip that they can stick onto a plate, similar to like a sticker. They can put it through the machine, and then it'll record the highest temperature. So that's a tool that they can use also to make sure that your equipment is working properly. So this here is an example of a 3-compartment sink. These are in all labs. They are for wash, rinse, and sanitize. You want to make sure that your 3-compartment sink is big enough for whatever equipment you are using. You want to make sure it's at least big enough to accommodate full sheet pans. These sinks can be very difficult to use if they're not big enough. They do sell them in different sizes. There's little mini ones, and there's also very large ones. You want to make sure that it's sized appropriately. Don't just go by price. Don't just buy the cheapest one. You want to make sure that you get some that actually fit all the things that you need into it. So I would recommend, if you're in the position of buying your own, that you test it out, right? So make sure that the stock pot that you intend on buying actually fits in the sink. Okay, so hand washing stations are required in several different areas of your operation. It should be easy for staff to wash their hands. They need to be well stocked and maintained. So there should be someone assigned to refilling these stations and keeping them clean. And they have to be available to staff to use at all times. Hand washing stations cannot be blocked by portable equipment or stacked full of dirty kitchenware, right? So you can never use them for, washing your plates. You can't use them for washing your vegetables. It's only for hand washing, and they do have requirements for what should be available at the hand washing sink. So occasionally there is a hazard that happens whenever you connect water supplies, and the issue here is basically backflow of dirty water into the clean water supply. So your clean water supply is to be coming out of the pipes, which comes from county utilities. A backflow would be created as a result of pressure pushing contaminants back into the water supply. It can also happen when there's high water use in one area of the operation, and that kind of creates a sucking vacuum that pulls the dirty water back into the plumbing. So that is called the back siphonage. A running faucet below the flood rim of a sink is also an example of a cross connection that can lead to back siphonage. A running hose in a mop bucket is another example. So it's pretty common to see hoses connected to a faucet in a mop closet, but it should be a short hose. So it should be just long enough to get the water aimed into the bucket. It should not be basically draped into the bucket to where if you turn off the water, it could get sucked back in. On a 3-compartment sink, you will see that you have 2 air gaps here. You have one between the faucet and the rim of the sink, and then you also have one down there on the bottom where the drain leads into the floor drain. So a vacuum breaker is one way of kind of preventing that cross backflow from happening. So do not attach a hose to a faucet unless a backflow prevention device is used, such as a vacuum breaker. This vacuum breaker prevents the back siphonage. It does this by closing a check valve inside here, and it seals off the water supply line to shut the water flow whenever it's engaged. So it has kind of this long lever here, so it opens and closes a valve inside there. Here is a diagram of the air gap that I just mentioned. The faucet here should never be level with the top of the water, right? So if you notice, all faucets are going to be large and curved, and to where it's going to be several inches above the water surface. And then down here on the bottom, you would have a pipe that basically just stops. It looks like there's a pipe missing, but it's designed that way so that it will just drop down into a large floor drain below. So you have to have adequate lighting in your facility. This helps to make sure that your employees are able to determine when food is good or bad. You can also determine when things are dirty and need to be cleaned. They will check to make sure that you have enough light. So that is measured in the intensity of the light is called the foot candles of the light, also sometimes called lux. Your local jurisdiction will probably require the prep areas to be brighter than other areas. Like for instance, a fine dining restaurant will probably have a dim dining room, but your kitchen would not be. Your kitchen would still have to be very bright so that it's safe to work in there. The lights should always be shatter resistant light bulbs, especially in kitchen areas. And then they would have to have some sort of a light cover over it. You could not have just exposed light bulbs because it would be too much of a hazard. If they were to break, they would fall into the food. In order to maintain the appropriate level of lighting, you would have to replace your bulbs quickly once they burn out. Designated storage areas for the garbage. You need to make sure that waste and recyclables are separate from the food and food contact surfaces. Additionally, I would say do not make it a habit of using the top of a trash can as a table. I have seen that before where people run out of table space, so they put a sheet tray, which is just a large flat metal tray, over the trash can, and they just kind of start working there. That is absolutely never allowed. Storage must not create a nuisance or a public health hazard. So in certain areas, sometimes you need a cover over it as well. An imminent health hazard would be something where it is a significant threat or danger to the health and of your public that you're serving and requires immediate correction or closure to prevent injury. So crises of this nature would be like a complete electrical outage, a fire, flooding, sewage backups, um, or in like you don't have access to fresh water. So if any of those things were to occur, your immediate corrective action would be that you would have to shut down until you're able to actually get that corrected. I have a pretty interesting example of something like that actually happening a few years back. It was quite a while now, but it was at Baybrook Mall where they had a sewer backup just like kind of in the food court of the mall. So as if you guys have been there, there is a restroom that's nearby. Um, so there was sewage backup, but then it was causing all of the outlets, like to correct the problem, they couldn't have fresh water for a time. Um, all of these outlets decided to continue serving for some time without access to fresh water, and every single one of them got a citation because they were working without access to fresh water, which obviously means that they can't wash hands and things like that. Um, Other things that would be a hazard would be like a power failure because you wouldn't be able to maintain temperature for TCS foods. And fire, obviously, that's a dangerous one, so that goes without saying. I think the book also mentions physical security, like unauthorized people inside the facility, especially if they can access storage and processing areas. This can also weaken your facility's security. Okay, so how do you respond? Um, Determine if there is a significant risk to the safety or security of your food. If the risk is significant, you would have to stop service. You should notify your local regulatory authority, so that's your health inspector. Decide how to correct the problem. So if that's establishing time temperature controls, if just monitoring it, what can you do, to correct the problem? If you can correct it on site or you can correct it quickly, then generally you don't have to notify anyone. You can just, make sure that you're doing things safe. However, if it's an ongoing problem, then you may have to shut down for a time. So let's review from the chapter. What are some of the most important things to look for when choosing materials for floors, walls, and your ceiling? So they talked about durability. They talked about it needs to be easy to clean. It should be smooth. If you should be able to sanitize it. So oftentimes you'll see just flat tiles. You will see sort of like smooth plastic paneling is sometimes used. And then what standards must equipment, food contact services meet in order to keep food safe? So this goes back to NSF. These are their requirements. So the NSF says that the standards for food equipment require that they be non-absorbent, smooth, corrosion resistant, and food equipment must also be easy to clean, durable, and resistant to damage. So it should not be something that's very fragile that, is going to, flimsy plastic that's just going to like chip and contaminate the food. It should not be, it shouldn't have a whole bunch of like grooves and areas that cannot be cleaned because that would be areas where pathogens can grow as well. Okay, so they have a standing mixer. So reference the pictures in your book where it's talking about floor-mounted equipment. So this is a large mixer, and it has been installed on the floor. So how many inches above the floor does it need to be? Um, so it's not in a masonry base, which would be another option, whereas like, basically solid, sealed, and there wouldn't be any gap between the equipment and the floor because it's all sealed up. So in this one, it's basically has feet, right? So how tall do those feet have to be? The answer would be D, 6 inches. So for reference, 6 inches is the length of a dollar bill. So if you can just you can easily picture that in your mind, and then, just kind of think about that whenever you're, you know, doing a walk around inspection to see if things are, the right height up off the floor. What factors must dishwashers have the ability to measure? So we know that we need to measure their temperature, their water pressure, cleaning and sanitizing chemical concentration should also be measured. Okay, so this hand washing station has been set up. However, it is missing a couple of items. So if you look at the book, at the picture, there's a few things that should be included. So you're missing the sign. So the health department does call out these signs. They will tell you that you're missing your hand washing sign. The sign should be posted right here on the wall. There should also be a clock so that people can know that they are washing their hands for the appropriate length of time. And it also doesn't show that there's a garbage container for them to put their hand towels. So we're going to review how backflow can be prevented. So the best way to prevent backflow is to avoid creating the cross connection in the first place. So do not attach a hose to a faucet unless a backflow prevention device is attached. A vacuum breaker is a mechanical device that prevents the back siphonage, and it does this by closing a check valve and sealing the water supply line when the water flow is stopped. And then creating an air gap can also be used. That's the only sure way to prevent backflow because there's no possible way that the water can defy gravity and go through that space. So pay close attention to this chapter. This tends to be a chapter that students just glance over and then like, oh yeah, maintaining facilities, yeah, it all makes sense. But pay attention to the, inches off the floor, the air gaps, the backflow, things like that, because they are asked on ServSafe. And I wouldn't want this to be, an easy question for you guys to miss. Just remember the definitions. What can be done to keep garbage from contaminating food and equipment? Remove it from prep areas quickly. So rule of thumb is that you want to keep your prep surface as clean as possible. You want to remove items as you're working. Don't let food scraps and things like that pile up. Once you have trimmed the meat or you have peeled the potatoes or whatever, you need to get all of the trash that you're not going to use off the surface of the table as quickly as you can. Your garbage containers, you have to remember that those do need to get cleaned as well. Purchase leak-proof, waterproof, and pest-proof containers. So these are containers that you would store your foods in. Make sure that they are deterrent to pests. Cover your containers when not in use. Store waste and recyclables separate from food and food contact surfaces, and make sure outdoor containers have tight-fitting lids and keep them covered. Your outdoor garbage bins should, like the dumpsters, they should have they have the lids that flip up and down. They should be down at all times to deter the larger pests from getting in there. Also, your dumpster has to be on a non-porous surface, so such as concrete or asphalt. It could not just be sitting on grass or on gravel. So our last review question is, what should be done if there is a sewer backup in your facility? So I think we've already covered this one. It would depend on how severe the backup is. So if it's just maybe one drain that's not draining well and you are able to get that under control quickly with some drain cleaner, then you can minimize that hazard and move on with your day. However, if you've got significant sewer backups to where your plumbing is not working or you have toilets that are backing up or things like that, then that would be a case where you would have to shut down. That would not be an environment where you would be able to continue producing food safely, obviously. So depending on how severe it is, you may have to notify the health department of what has happened, and they may need to let you know what steps you need to take before you can reopen. It would actually be a violation for you to not report that. So that's it for chapter 9. It's a fairly short chapter. Go ahead and study for your quiz and have a good week.